How's it going, everybody? And welcome to the next episode of the Legacy Football Podcast. My name's Alex, your host, and I'm here today with Jordan, Aryan, and Jake, the same three that were on our last Studs and Dud podcast. How we doing, guys?
Doing well, Commish. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, obviously feeling very strong today, Commish. So thank you once again.
I know we got a little bit of a rivalry going on with tool brands today. Not very many fancy podcasts you can come to get that kind of content.
It's not a rivalry, if you ask me.
Hey, Harbor Freight Sales in Milwaukee. That's all I'm saying. Let's move on there.
Milwaukee makes its own argument. Milwaukee doesn't have to talk, bro. Milwaukee walks the walk.
Go ahead and post your comments as to who you think is better with DeWalt and Milwaukee, and we'll see who actually wins.
Oh man, you asked for the wrong battle. You asked for the wrong battle.
No better people to talk about tools than the two best tools on the podcast. You're on the bottom.
Nothing we can't fix, bro.
Let's go ahead and get this started, Alex.
Well, you're gonna need to fix a lot of your takes,
right?
Yeah, you're gonna need to fix a lot of your takes. Don't worry. So today we're talking about the NFC South. We're talking about the Carolina Panthers, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, New Orleans Saints, and Atlanta Falcons.
I'd like to say the NFC South. Sorry, Commissioner. I do apologize. But the NFC South is the most trash division in the entire NFL. It's cheese pizza. It's vanilla ice cream. It's boring. But let's get into it.
All right, let's get into it then. Jordan, lead us off with your first studs and duds.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm sorry, Jordan. I'm sorry. I got to go to Jake on this one. He's obviously passionate. Let's hear what Jake has to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, talk to us, Jake.
So, very passionate about this stellar division that's in the NFL. Nothing but hammers coming out of that division year in and year out. It's great, right? I love it. But anyways, so my stud of the NFC South, if I had to choose one, there's not many. There's not many. Kyle Pitts, though. Let's go Kyle Pitts this year. He's one of the better tight end.
I can get on board with that. Kyle Pitts is a good player.
Right, one of the better tight end prospects coming into the league in recent years. He hasn't lived up to the hype just yet. But if you look at Kyle Pitts' quarterbacks over the years, he's had Matt Ryan or a ghost of Matt Ryan, we'll say. That's his quarterback year one. Then he's had Mariota, Ritter, and Heineke. So that's just kind of where we're at with Kyle Pitts and my stud.
I'm sorry. I'm laughing so hard because it's just been such consistent negativity. But it's so true. It's so long. It's such a long tale of sadness. I just can't stop laughing. Oh man.
But yeah, so
tell me more about Pitts.
That's my stud. Like I said, he's had amazing potential, but everyone knows how I feel about the word potential. You could potentially be the greatest, or you could potentially be the worst.
But all up to your potential.
He finally has Kirk Cousins, so sky's the limit for him. We'll see what happens. And that's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, very concise of you. Very concise of you.
Yeah. I mean, I think Kyle Pitts definitely has the best opportunity to succeed that he's ever had. And I don't even think that's close. And to your point, there's not a whole lot of like superstar talent in the South. So
yeah,
I can definitely see where he could easily be, top 5 tight end, and you're getting him after a lot of those guys are going.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Not a whole lot of superstar talent. If there's one thing the South has, it's talent. All right.
You didn't say superstar. You didn't say superstar.
They might not be able to win, but they got some talent down there, bro. They got some talent down there.
Yeah, I disagree, but let's go.
Jordan, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I'm pretty sure it was the 2021 season, his first year in the league when Matt Ryan was there, if I'm correct.
Yeah, the ghost of Matt Ryan.
So, and even with the ghost of Matt Ryan, Kyle Pitts had his most successful season in the league. He had over 1,000 yards receiving. So to Alex's point, I think when you bring in a proven veteran with Kirk Cousins, with that young roster, with some of the other skill guys that we'll talk about a little later on the podcast, there's a lot to like about Kyle Pitts' upside this year. Currently right now he's ranked as the number 7 ADP tight end, 62 overall. So I think, based upon that ranking with Kirk Cousins coming in, I think there's a lot to like about his situation.
Yeah, I mean, sorry to cut you off, and the receiving ability's always been there for Kyle Pitts, right? It's never been a doubt of his talent. It's just been, like you said, a long lineage of really quarterback incompetency since the ghost of Matt Ryan. And, now he's coming into a situation where not only does he got Kirk Cousins, and Kirk Cousins coming off of the Achilles, but he's also got, I'm a huge fan of, and that's Michael Penix coming out of Washington. So either way, no matter who ends up starting for them, he's going to be in a good situation moving forward from the quarterback position.
Much better than Ritter was.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Mariota, Ritter, Heineke, goes to Matt Ryan. That's a stellar lineup right there.
Yeah,
That's rough. And just
Oh.
offensively, the way they did things,
Mhm.
the way they went about it. Arthur Smith it wasn't the vibe.
Yeah.
Arthur Smith was not the vibe for Atlanta for whatever reason. But now who's coaching down there now?
Raheem Morris, the old
Oh
defensive
yeah,
coordinator from
Raheem
the
is
Rams.
perfect. Raheem is perfect. He came out and said, "Oh, Bijan and Drake London." He said, "Drake London, Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts. Like that's what we're trying to do out here, and that's what they need to be doing."
And that's the thing too. To your point, you brought up a good point, Aryan, with a guy like Coach Morris. There, he's what's considered a player's coach. I think he understands the importance of getting these types of guys their touches and getting them involved in the game early, and maybe their underutilization over the past couple years. So I think he understands the importance of getting guys like that involved early in order to have success this season as a team.
Yeah. Let the players play.
And we'll talk a lot more about Drake London and Bijan because they will be coming up eventually.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Jake's dud now.
So my
rival, let's hear it.
Yeah, my dad. Not a lot of people will agree with me, but that's okay. Mike Evans. He does have 10 straight 1,000-yard seasons, yes, which is good. That's amazing, right? That's consistency in the definition
At its
of
finest. Yeah.
But he's now 30 years old. Baker Mayfield's coming off a career year. We'll see if he can do that again. Maybe not. They just lost their offensive coordinator. They drafted Jalen McMillan in the 3rd round, I believe, this year. And so with drafting McMillan and having Godwin go back to the slot, I think there's a lot more mouths to feed now. And so we'll just see, father time wins all. So we'll see if Mike Evans can't get it for an 11th year. So maybe not.
Yeah, it's hard to bet against a guy like Mike Evans, but I see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I think the loss of Canales is a big thing for them.
I think he's going in the 3rd round, if I'm not mistaken, his ADP. And I just think there might be better dudes suited in the 3rd round. I think maybe 4th or 5th round for Evans, but I don't know if a top 3 pick warrants.
Yeah, and here's the thing, as we know, Father Time is undefeated.
Mm-hmm.
He's 30 years old right now.
Yep.
The one thing that's tough about it is I'm pretty sure he's the only receiver in NFL history to have 1,000 yards in every season that he's played, which is tough because he's probably what we consider between him and Keenan Allen, probably 2 of the more underrated receivers that get talked about in our generation of guys. But at a certain time, Father Time does catch up, and there is going to be a drop off of production. Now you wonder when that is. You hate to be the guy to bet against that, but there is a lot of merit in what it is that Jake is saying. I don't know if I see it this year. I think it's to be determined, especially with a couple of the additions in the offense. There's a change. Obviously, the OC is now the head coach at Carolina. So there is a lot that's kind of to be determined going into this 24 season. And I think Mike Evans is right there in that discussion.
I think just to argue in favor of Mike a little bit, obviously he's been doing it. I mean, I don't think that there's a guy out there really, if you really sit and look at the numbers, it's been more consistent than Mike over the past decade as a wide receiver in the NFL, So what's to say that he's not going to do it again in his 2nd year with Baker Mayfield?
Well, lastly, I just want to finish on this point too, because I know we got to move on. Alex usually likes to bring up this term a lot where it's a quarterback proven or quarterback tested receiver. I think Mike Evans is one of those guys who's proven the test with the amount of quarterbacks that he's been with, that he's somebody who will consistently be productive regardless of the quarterback that plays there, even though Baker did have success last year. So I think that's
QB proof.
He's QB proof. That's the term. So I see that as well too, which can argue in favor of Mike Evans.
Yeah, I still think Mike is going to be a great receiver, but I don't like his ADP either, Jake. I think it's a little rich for a 30-year-old receiver, just because typically a 30-year-old receiver is kind of the beginning of the cliff. So if you're drafting him in that range, you're expecting 7 touchdowns, probably 1,200, 1,300 yards. Not to say you can't do it, but I would rather buy the under on that one too.
Yep.
So, all right, well, Jordan, now we'll go back to you. Let's hear about your guys.
Yeah, so with my stud, probably a safe pick, some would consider here. Bijan Robinson from Atlanta had a very productive rookie season. One of the things about him, kind of a similar situation like we talked about with the Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery dynamic, like we talked about in the previous episode. Bijan was one of those guys that Atlanta said purposely that they're going to be careful with how they bring him along, because one of the things that they have to their disposal is they have a guy there in Tyler Algier who had an 1,000-yard season as a rookie running back. So they have the ability to not overuse Bijan early, like a lot of people have done and run running backs early into the ground. So if you look at his value right now, I think he's number 3 at the running back spot, and then he's also number 7 overall. So I only see his value going up. I only see his touches and his production going up. We brought up Raheem Morris earlier. I think he's going to understand the value and importance of getting a guy like Bijan touches and getting him involved, and how important the dynamic of having a player like that, because although I do think Algier is a good player, I do think Bijan brings a different element that there's only a few guys in the league that can bring from the running back position.
So Jordan, I got a question for you. Obviously, Bijan has an elite ceiling.
Yep.
What do you think his floor is? Because it's pretty safe to argue he has one of the highest floors of any of the top 5-ish running backs.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it's super dependent on obviously health and scheme, and I think that's also dependent on what happens around him. I think it's going to be super important for Kirk Cousins to be successful and get those other guys involved early, because once again, I think Atlanta is one of those sleeper teams going into this season. I think with Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Algier, and some of these guys in a weak NFC South, I think they have an opportunity to go from average to really good quick, because even last year, if you look at Atlanta, they were right there in the hunt till the end. And if they had better quarterback play, according to most people, they probably win that division and they probably get ahead. So I think to go back to your question, I think Bijan's floor is going to be dependent on what happens around him and his health. But it's hard for me to see him not being a top 5 value running back with his ability to run the football and basically be a third down back and a receiving back.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing to see for Bijan is the ceiling, because there is none. You know, he's just that good. He's that dynamic of a playmaker. He's a Christian McCaffrey level athlete. He can put those type of numbers on the field if he's in the right situation with the right people around him. So the talent's there. It can happen. And I think I'm starting to sense a theme of a team that we like for studs on this episode.
Yeah, and just lastly to add onto that point with Bijan, as far as just durability, you know, when he was at Texas, he was there in a backfield with Jonathan Brooks and some other guys too. So like I said, as far as durability, this guy hasn't had a big workload. So he's a guy who's young, who's going to have opportunities with Coach Morris and Cousins and those guys in the building. He's going to have some opportunities there with fresh legs to be a good player for them for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to get any objections on Bijan being a stud. The floor questions is interesting to me because obviously he's being drafted as a top 2, top 3 running back, and I easily could see him hitting that. That's not a concern at all. But could you see him falling outside of the top 8?
No, I can't.
Yeah, I mean, once again, I think it's going to be dependent based off Atlanta team success, and I think based off the success of the other running back to Algier, and then going back to Bijan's health. I think when you tie in those factors, I think those are the things that it's going to come down to in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Bijan's the 101 for me in a dynasty startup right now. A 101. If I could pick any player to start my franchise with from a fantasy football standpoint, it would be Bijan Robinson.
Yeah, and I think if you look at him and Gibbs, Jahmyr, they're both being used very similar, and I think they have similar projections as far as utilage and where they're going as far as potential ceilings. And they're both in fortunate positions because there's also good running backs there who can also help out, take some of the load off them, which helps their durability long term.
For sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's hear a little bit about my former Raider quarterback, Derek Carr.
Yeah. So the thing with Derek is Derek's kind of been on what I feel is a steady decline. I think if you just look at the Saints, team and the organization in general, I think there's a lot of questions going into this season I would have to double check it, but outside of Chris Olave, Jawan Johnson at the tight end position, and obviously Alvin Kamara, there's been some health issues there. There's been some contract issues in the past. Been suspended as well too. So I just think with looking at the trajectory of the team and also Derek Carr, you look at Derek Carr's ADP right now. Derek Carr is ranked literally 32 and 185 overall at the quarterback spot. And with the weapons around him and just the surrounding cast, I just can't see that changing anytime soon in a positive direction. So I think Derek's going to continue to trend down. And the other thing too is to consider Spencer Rattler was also drafted in this draft by New Orleans as well too. And Spencer's one of those guys. He's gotten a lot of talk. He's gotten a lot of hype. People know his story. People know his background. I could easily see a situation where if the season isn't going well due to Derek's age and where they're at roster-wise, I could see them at the end putting in a guy like Spencer to kind of give them a test of what the 25 season is going to look like if the season doesn't go well for New Orleans quick. So that's another dynamic to add in it too. So I don't see a lot of positivity in Derek Carr's situation moving forward.
Yeah, I know Derek signed a 3-year deal last season, so I don't know how much dead money would be on the cap for the 25 season if they moved on from him, but I could definitely see if they end up starting really poorly, if they're 4-7, 4-8, and out of the playoffs, I could easily see them benching Derek and putting Spencer Rattler in and just seeing what happens the rest of the way.
Yeah, and going back to just true fantasy value and ADP value, the other thing that's always going to take away from a guy like Derek is when you get into the goal line situations, you're always going to be able to feature a guy like Taysom Hill, who's going to be able to take some of that fantasy value and production away from Carr. So there's always going to be a little bit of that you have to consider that curbs him from a fantasy perspective as well too.
There's really no reason to draft. Sorry to cut you off. No reason to draft Derek Carr.
There's not.
You know what I mean?
That's I see the Saints going like 2-4, 2-5, and then people are gonna start calling for Derek Carr's head, and they're like, "Well, we need a spark. What can we do? No, Rattler. Let's put him in, and see what happens."
And that's the thing too. Like, if you look at Derek's one of those guys where, like, if you look at his career statistics, it's never been really bad, but it's also never been like great. Like there was a couple years.
That's coming from a guy who once compared him to Aaron Rodgers, bro. I'm telling you what. Hey, this dude is telling me. He's like, I'm just saying.
No, but
he does have a pretty deep ball, but he's just never willing to throw it.
And people know this about Derek too, but Derek hasn't been the same ever since he broke. It was that ankle or leg, but a lot of his career trajectory has changed since then. Like I said, did he have a couple really good years? But if you look at the majority of Derek Carr's career, it's been some good, some meh. It's been somewhere right in the middle. Like Alex always likes to rank and compare quarterbacks. Derek Carr is one of those guys that you would always consider a career average 16 to 18 to 20 out of 32 quarterbacks. And that was with rosters around him that gave him the ability to.
Our Raider teams had quality offensive weapons.
Exactly.
I mean, you had a not prime, but still pretty prime Michael Crabtree. You had Amari Cooper. You had Jared Cook, who balled out the year that we had Jared Cook. Latavius Murray was the stud. Like, I'm just saying, like, Jared Cook in his prime was a beast. I don't know why.
I was waiting for you to say something like Darren McFadden. That's probably the last good player you had.
Raiders ain't been good since the '80s. Come on.
You can't tell me that he hasn't had weapons. That's all I'm saying.
But
he also had multiple. He also had multiple coaches.
Did him and McFadden even play together?
No, I don't think so.
That would have really been something.
Yeah. As far as I know, they didn't. But so I don't think anybody has any arguments against Derek Carr being done this year.
Don't draft Derek Carr, you'll be just fine.
Don't draft Derek Carr. That's a dud. Even at the undrafted ranking, just don't. You don't need the insurance. Draft Spencer Rattler.
Yep, you'll be fine.
All right. Well, Aryan, let's go for the third Falcon in a row.
Let's go.
Let's talk about him.
We're sensing a theme commish, okay? And
Mhm.
we got a guy on the Dirty Birds here who's been flying high for a long time, just been waiting, waiting for somebody to put the ball where he's at. All right. And now he's got the guy. And I think the guy that we all know, love, and are coming to trust in an Atlanta Falcons uniform, Kirk Cousins. All right.
Mhm.
This guy can ball. He's balled out everywhere he's been. He's the guy. He's bringing that energy. He's going to be doing the gritty down there in the ATL, bro. It's
Let's
going to be
go.
good. And he's by far and away the best quarterback that any of these guys have worked with, even since the aforementioned shadow or ghost of Matt Ryan, right?
Mhm.
So with that upgrade at that position, every single pass catcher gets better. But for me, when I look at Drake London in particular, I was so high on him coming out of college. When you look at what he did in a limited sample size at USC in one, he missed like 4 games in his, I believe it was his sophomore season or junior season, and he was on like historic pace for yardage, touchdown, catches. He was just dominating, like Triple Crown, Cooper Cup level dominance at the collegiate level, and then had his season cut short, lower leg injury, tib fib, something like that. But coming off of that, I was just really excited about him. And obviously, he hasn't had the quarterback to really do him justice, to really serve his talent to what it can be. And now he does. And we're seeing that. So when we look at Drake London's ADP here, give me 1 second. Do you guys see it on the screen there?
23 overall,
So
second round.
23 overall, second round. So end of the second round ADP for Drake London.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's value. I think that's value with the talent that this guy has. I mean, you're hearing a lot of analysts in a lot of different formats discussing him as a breakout player for a reason, and that's pushing him, way up draft boards. But I think even with that momentum, I'm still in on Drake London this season. The talent is there, and the quarterback is finally there to match it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I do see a lot of upside with Drake London, especially with the addition of Kirk Cousins this year, and obviously, as we mentioned earlier, the new head coach with Coach Morris. Looking at his ADP value, I do think there's a lot of confidence with the addition of Kirk Cousins in his value this year, because there is some guys that he's ranked above right now that I wouldn't necessarily put above right now. I think I look at DJ Moore, Mike Evans, Brandon Ayuk, even a Stephon Diggs, Cooper Cup. Like, I think there's a couple proven commodities who I would put ahead of him. Now, like I said, I think he does have the potential to take that next step because of the quarterback issues that we've mentioned earlier. But I do see that there's a lot of people who are high on Drake London's potential this year with the new addition of Kirk Cousins and the new changes in Atlanta.
Oh, absolutely. And he's so young, dude. He's 23 years old.
Yeah.
This 6'4" receiver, 23 years old. Got a couple years in now. He's got a feel for the game. He's getting open, man. He gets open all
Yeah.
the time. He's a threat in the red zone. He's already seen such a massive target share in a really low volume passing offense. I expect that target share to remain pretty consistent moving forward in a much higher volume, higher octane, and just more efficient offense overall with the playmakers he has around him. So I see a lot more opportunities in that offense, and
Yeah,
I mean,
you would definitely hope or expect that to change with the addition of Cousins, because the past 2 years, 2 touchdowns and 4 touchdowns receiving respectively. So there's definitely going to need to be some growth there, especially if Atlanta wants to be successful as a team.
and Atlanta knows that.
In that NFC South, that's wide open.
Yeah.
If with Kirk Cousins, if they can take that next step, like I said, there's a lot of upside there for Drake London at his ADP.
And just from a fantasy standpoint, you want guys to catch touchdowns. He's a big body Benz, bro. He's getting out there. You like what Mike Evans has done throughout his career, and you want to play dynasty fantasy football? Draft Drake London.
No, I think that's
the
a good
closest
comparison.
thing you're gonna get. That's the closest thing you're gonna get if you want to put that on your roster for the next decade.
Nowhere to go but up for him, for sure.
Right.
Yeah. So here's my question. So last year, Atlanta had 3,524 passing yards and 2,159 rushing yards. Not great in the passing yards department, for sure.
That's about average.
Let's say Kirk Cousins throws for 4,200. And I don't know. I mean, 2,000 rushing yards, obviously, with Arthur Smith, that's kind of a given, for his offenses to be so run dependent. I don't know what Raheem Morris's, game plan is going to end up being to run the ball and throw the ball with Kirk Cousins, how often. But we have Drake London as a stud. we have Bijan Robinson as a stud, and we have Kyle Pitts as a stud.
Studs.
The worry I have is that only one or two of them are going to break out, because you would have to have a historic level offense to have a superstar running back, a superstar tight end, and a superstar receiver.
The Lions did it last year.
I
The
think
Lions did it last year. Sam Laporta, Amon-Ra, and their running backs.
Yeah, and to add to Aryan,
No, but we also considered Detroit to be one of the best offenses in the NFL last season.
They're very good, but personnel for personnel, Atlanta's better.
Here's the other thing too. To add to,
I don't know if I would agree. I can agree with the running back. I don't know if I can agree with the receiver or tight end.
Maybe not for the tight end thing, because Sam Laporta is the shit.
I
think wide receiver.
And Amon-Ra has proved it year
Amon-Ra's
after year
Amon-Ra's
before he even had Jared Goff. So,
but if I'm building a team, I'd probably want to have Drake London. Just they're different guys, different reasons, you know.
Yeah.
So one of the things to consider with Atlanta, just talking about Raheem Morris, the head coach, he spent time in Washington when Shanahan was the head coach and Kyle Shanahan was there, and that elite coaching staff that everybody knows about. So he is a big believer in what Shanahan does. And obviously, if people remember, Shanahan at one point wanted Kirk Cousins to be the quarterback of the 49ers, and they tried to make that happen. So San Francisco has traditionally, as we've seen, they've been able to get McCaffrey, Kittle, multiple receivers involved in all of them production. And I think you're going to see a similar dynamic in Atlanta, which is one of the reasons why they said the owner took interest in Morris, is because of his background with the Shanahans and bringing that type of dynamic to Atlanta. And if you look at the weapons that they have, it is a perfect recipe for a run first play action offense to set up these types of guys like Kyle Pitts, Drake London over the middle, and to be explosive and take that next step. So, and the other thing too, lastly, it's in a mediocre division that we talked about. That's vanilla ice cream and cheese pizza.
Garbage.
Not only is it mediocre, bro, but their offensive line is good.
So
they have
eight games.
Line,
so half of the games out of the year, you get an opportunity against New Orleans, Carolina, and Tampa Bay.
New Orleans has always had a strong defense, though.
And that's a good point too. And there are things to consider. The NFC South in some ways, some of those teams have been known for their defense and other stuff. But I think with those things that we talked about, I think there's a lot to like as far as the upside with their ability to be able to do that and get all those guys involved.
Yeah, I just worry that we're putting too many eggs in one basket. But all right,
it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun offense.
Well, speaking of fun, this is going to be a fun debate because I
Let's
know
go.
a few people that feel very strongly about their opinions on this one. Let's hear it. Rachaad White.
All right, guys. Rachaad White. You know what? This is a player that I didn't like last year. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. I didn't like Rachaad White last year. And you know what? I'm going to have to eat my words. I'm going to have to eat my words, right? Because he played really good from a fantasy football standpoint this past season. But when we're trying to predict what's going to happen coming up, you got to at least look at the numbers. I'm not really an analytics guy, but you got to at least do yourself the justice of looking at the numbers. And when you look at what Rachaad White did from a numbers standpoint, I mean, he was in not even the bottom half. He was in like the bottom 10% of efficiency with players of at least 100 carries. Rachaad White averaged 3.6 yards a carry last year. 3.6 yards a carry. He had 70 targets and 64 receptions. So, I mean, all of his production really from a fantasy standpoint came on dump-offs. Pass play dump-offs when your team is down. Now, I'm not saying they're not going to be in that situation again. They probably will. I don't think they're going to be an improved team. I think they lost out on. Was Canales the OC? He was the OC at the time, right?
Yeah.
When he got hired to head coach in Carolina. So yeah, they lose the OC, but not only was he the OC, you obviously see his attitude and the way he commands a room and his presence that he brings there to the Carolina Panthers, and you see like, all right, this guy's a good leader. This guy's effective. You can see why he was effective with Baker Mayfield in particular. Like that makes sense, So I think he's a huge loss for them, and he's a tone setter. And you just can't expect a guy who was so historically inefficient to be successful again. And when you look at the touchdown numbers, let's see.
He had 9.
He had 9 total touchdowns.
Yeah, 1 in the playoff game, but I'm not counting that.
Okay. let's see, receiving touchdowns. He had 3 receiving touchdowns, 6 rushing touchdowns, 990 total yards on 272
No,
total
not total
carries.
yards. Not well,
990
you're talking
rush
about
yards.
rushing yards. Yeah,
990, yeah, 900. I'm sorry, I said rush TDs and then 990.
yeah, because he had 1700 total yards.
Right,
So
he had
let's
64.
not be unfair with his total yardage mark. He had almost 2,000.
Correct.
No.
You're absolutely right. He had 990 rush yards, so just shy of 1,000, productive, right, on 272 attempts, which is ridiculously high. He had
behind
70
the 32nd ranked offensive line. But continue.
which didn't get better.
Yeah,
Okay,
until
it
this
didn't get
draft.
better.
Until this draft.
It's still not
Until
better,
this
bro.
draft.
Yeah.
It's still not better.
So let me
It's
just
not better.
let me chime in
I don't know
here
how you
for a
can say it's
second.
worse. It
Yeah.
can't be worse than worst.
So I do agree
It will
with
be.
I do agree with
It will
Alex
be.
here. I think the one thing that we need to take into consideration is for Rachaad White, and I didn't really, I didn't have an opinion of him either way going into last year, but towards the end of the year, he kind of surprised me as the season went on. For him to have that type of production with that type of offensive line, and for a lot of people that don't remember, it was the offensive line that probably had the most injuries at the position in the league. I mean, you're talking multiple guys with season-ending injuries, catastrophic. And as we know, it's cliche, but everything starts up front. And what made Tampa Bay so successful in the past, even when Tom Brady was there, was how good they were on the offensive line and the ability to protect him and run the
Tristan
football.
Wirfs retiring was huge. Or was it
Um,
Tristan Wirfs or who? They had an offensive lineman that retired.
yeah, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but
Ryan Jensen.
Wirfs
Was
is
it
a
their
guy.
center?
Wirfs is a guy who they just locked up to a long-term deal. So you solidify that part of the offensive line. You also add through the draft, so I think there's a lot of upside there with his value going into this year. Now, I think there's some questions with them bringing in a guy like Bucky Irving, and there's some people who could argue is very similar in his skill set and dynamic and what he could bring to the team like a guy. But we've also mentioned this earlier in the podcast. It's becoming the standard protocol for NFL teams to kind of move into a traditional two-back running back system because of the durability of these guys and keeping these guys healthy. So, I think those are the things that you have to look at when you consider his value going into this season.
When you also mentioned health, and with those 272 carries and the amount of workload that he had, Rachaad White did not miss a single game last year and
Yep.
came out of the season healthy.
Yep.
On top of that, you mentioned Bucky Irving. What is it that Bucky Irving is known for? His receiving ability, right?
Mm-hmm.
What does Rachaad White do? One of the best jobs in the NFL at running back.
Well, he doesn't know how to run, so
Must be something else.
Once again, offensive line issues. You can't run anywhere if you're getting tackled behind the line. But two, Rachaad White's biggest threat is in the passing game. And whether you want to call it a dump off like a little screen or he's just running a little 5-yard hook, either way, he's still getting the ball in his hands and he's making plays with it. So when you have a guy that you drafted that has a similar skill set, but is not good at either one of them, or not as good as the incumbent starter, it's the same thing with Sean Tucker last year. Everybody wrote Rachaad White off last year and said, oh, Sean Tucker's going to take this job. Rachaad White hasn't proven anything. Well, Rachaad White just proved that he can handle a workhorse load.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he can play on an ass
productive
team.
in it.
And
they won the
still-
division. You talk about an ass division. None of these other teams won the division. They were at least
Well,
a
I'm
playoff
saying-
team and beat the Eagles in the playoffs.
Statistically,
they
they have
can't be
Baker
that
Mayfield.
ass.
Baker Mayfield and Dave Canales is what willed them to victory. Like you look at that team, aside from the way that those two guys did their thing, the play calling of Canales was incredible, and Baker Mayfield showing up in the clutch was incredible. And the defense played well at times late in the season.
Yeah,
I'm not saying they're a terrible
The
team.
1,700 total yards of offense is a massive chunk of the reason they were successful last year too.
It's a massive chunk, but did you watch Bucks games? Like if you
Yeah.
watch Bucks games,
I had
always
Rachaad
down.
White in, yeah,
They
because
were
their
always
offensive
down.
line
So
Baker Mayfield was always on the ground.
Yeah,
Baker Mayfield had a shit ton
It's not
of
a
sacks
sustainable.
last year.
That's not a sustainable fantasy perspective. You know what I mean?
I'm gonna throw this at you, Kamish. So you're blaming the line for his lack of production running ball, right?
I think that's a huge reason for it.
So he also ranked just individual talent alone 42nd in missed tackles last year and 45th in yards after contact.
Okay.
I think that's
And
where
I-
his efficiency comes in. What are you doing to miss tackles? What are you doing after you get hit to continue to move forward?
But those to me are a lot of the offensive line issues. If
No,
you're
but-
constantly getting swarmed on the offensive line, you're taking contact before you even get out of your break. So you have no head of steam and you're getting tackled behind the line.
So he has
That to
no.
me, it feels like an
no-
offensive line stat.
So he has no ability to make plays
He-
himself. He
he-
needs.
Here's
When,
what I'll
when you have the
That's
worst
what I hear.
offensive line, what do you expect?
That's what I hear. He has.
doesn't-
What do
They
you
don't have the
expect?
worst
You have
offensive
no
line.
opportunity.
Right.
They had the
They had
worst
the-
run blocking offensive line last year. Look it
They
up.
have the overall. Yeah, I know. I understand the run blocking. I'm just saying that.
Well, what does a
Tampa
running
Bay-
back do? He
Tampa Bay's
runs.
overall O-line rank is 29th. I'm not saying they're good. I'm just saying
Oh
their
yeah,
overall
huge
rank was
improvement.
29 out of
29.
32.
Okay, 29. No, I'm just saying 29. You know, they're
Bro,
not
it's
dumbass.
3 spots from the
But-
bottom. How
but-
are you even
but I
using that as an
know,
argument?
But listen to me. You're not letting me finish my argument. What did they do to improve on that situation, Alex?
They drafted a tackle out of Duke named Graham
Barton.
Barton.
They drafted
yeah.
Graham Barton. Okay.
Mhm.
What else did they do?
They're also getting a lot of their injured players coming back. Like Jordan mentioned, they were the most injured offensive line. I think they played a total of 45 snaps together as a unit. From their overall starting lineup, their projected starting lineup in training camp, I think they played 45 snaps as an entire unit.
They're
If you
not
get
getting
all
all
those-
of those guys back, though. They're
I-
not
I-
getting all of those guys back healthy. Have you seen the injury report? Do you know who's coming back healthy and who's not?
I
It's
think
not
the
a
one
100% return rate. Tristan Wirfs is going to be a huge thing, but I don't even think he was the one that was he out all season? I don't think he was. I'm pretty sure Tristan Wirfs played most of the season.
I think the one thing that we got to look at with White in comparison to last season too is because there wasn't another guy there to take some of the load off of him. I think some of his production was by necessity too. I mean, you look at his carries last year; he had 276 rushing attempts last year. I can't see that off the top of my head, but just looking at that number, I would have to assume that's probably somewhere in top 5 in the league.
Is the second most.
Second most carries in the league. And I'm going to be honest, a guy
Yeah,
like that.
McCaffrey.
And once again,
Yeah, he shouldn't be getting the second most touches. I'm not saying he's that kind of running back.
No. And it's not to say it with that, but if we're talking once again in the value of White going into next season in ADP, I think some of his value and success last year came out of necessity because of injury, because of the offense, and because of their quarterback and situation. Look at Baker Mayfield and his trajectory as a quarterback. Okay. He's never been great, in my opinion. He's had some good, he's also had some bad. To me, he is your prototypical, what we talk about, NFC South, could be mediocre, could be a little bit better. He's your 9-8, 10-7 wild card type of quarterback. So, based off what they did last year and quarterback scheme wise, Jake brought this up earlier. A lot of White's success was because there wasn't opportunities there for an Evans, or Godwin isn't healthy at points last year, or because they couldn't block on the line and they had to get the ball out in 3 seconds or less. A guy like White is added value because he's getting those opportunities.
And I'm going to have to eat my words a little bit here. Sorry to cut you off, but they drafted Cody Mock, who's an absolute stud. Have you guys seen that guy?
Yeah,
Have
North
you
Dakota
seen-
State, the guy who freaking got the gap. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give it to you, Alex. They drafted Cody Mock, so they did improve their offensive line.
I was gonna
That's
say
a fact.
they definitely focused on the offensive line. I mean, they took an offensive lineman in the first round.
They did.
When there was still plenty of defensive talent on the draft board.
Yeah.
So,
and
yeah,
I,
I mean,
They knew
Center
that was
and right
a huge...
tackle, still questionable players. Cody Mock is a late round pick, but I really like him.
But even
you
if
guys-
they
Tristan
didn't do
Wirfs
any...
is the only like O-line
Yeah, Pro
of,
Bowl
like,
level
proven
player.
substance. But with you add Graham Barton to the mix, and they got some guys now.
go ahead,
Yeah, I
Alex.
mean, realistically, even if they don't improve, to your point, there's no chance in hell they're 32nd again. Like, that's pretty hard to do 2 years in a row. Even if they're an average to slightly below average offensive line, they don't have to be a top 10 offensive line. But if you are the worst at something, how can you expect somebody to be able to produce at a high enough level, no matter how many touches you give them?
I think the thing is, when you have Baker Mayfield as a quarterback, you have to run the football. So people know that. And
Exactly,
They
yeah.
just key on that. So it's going to be hard to run block when Baker Mayfield's your quarterback.
But I
That's-
also think in a sense that's where Bucky Irving can kind of help that out. Once again, like longevity wise, White, I like 280 carries or close to that at his age. That's not a long term
No,
routine
definitely
for
not.
success.
Not for his
So,
body type either. He's too
to-
lean for that.
And I think you guys remember this from the group chat, but even though this running back class wasn't valued very high by the experts, I was somebody who did like Bucky Irving coming out. And I do think I do think he is a guy who can add value. And if you hear some of the early talks from training camp and just some of the early rookie OTAs, there is praise and there is a lot of hope for a guy like Bucky to be able to come in and add some value and impact. Because once again, I can't think off the top of my head. I can't think of the other running back who came in to help in White last year. And even remembering the announcers talking about White last year, that was the big thing, was his workload and how much he was getting beat up at certain portions of the season because how much the Bucks were relying on him.
Straight up. Now you got to add Truckee to the mix, and tell me what, dude, that boy is going to be running through defenders. He's going to be impressing people. They're going to be like, damn, we got to keep Bucky on the field. Rachaad White stock.
Yeah.
We'll see. That's not a bet I'm willing to bet on. I still believe in Rachaad. So agree to disagree.
And Rachaad, Alex Truss.
Yeah.
Commissions
Hey,
your studs and duds.
I think, well, real quick, last thing about Rachaad White, just a little tagline of it. I think he's like Amari Cooper. I think he's like Amari Cooper. I think he's going to be super underappreciated. You don't necessarily view him as a star on your roster, even if you do have him, but you know you're going to get production. Whether it's consistent or not, that's going to be, hard to tell. But I think overall, he's that level of player where you're going to be happy you have him on your team, but you're not going to feel like you have a superstar at the position. I don't want to make it sound like I have Rachaad White in my top 5. But I do have a lot of value in him, and I do think that he is going massively underrated, even at around 4 ADP. He's going behind guys like Josh Jacobs in some drafts. And
Josh Jacobs is a better player.
We'll see. In fantasy, I don't think so, but I love Josh, so no complaints.
Josh is the man, dude. He's a
dog.
Right.
From one running back in the NFC to another one. Well, let's talk a little bit about Alvin Kamara.
Oh, buddy, your guy.
Yeah. So Alvin Kamara has the passing game pretty much locked up. You look at a lot of his games last year, the majority of his productions were dump offs from Derek Carr, and I don't see that changing. They have these deep threats in Olave and Rashid Shaheed, but there's still going to be a dump off to Alvin Kamara and get him in space type of offense. So when I'm looking at a high floor player, especially in the middle of the draft, I'm looking at a guy like Alvin Kamara, who I know is probably going to get at least 100 targets. Like that's been pretty
crazy,
consistent. Huh? Yeah. I mean, if you're looking at how much his actual target share was last year, I'll pull it up right now. He had 86 targets, and he missed the first 3 games, and he missed the last game of the year.
Yeah.
The way that they were targeting him in a full season, if he can stay healthy, it'll be 100 target season, and I have no doubt about that.
Especially come week 3 when Spencer Rattler's starting.
Exactly.
Yeah, very well could be.
Yeah.
I think he still has elite juke ability because he's just so fluid the way that he runs, and he's so explosive. I think he has the job locked up. I mean, Kendre Miller was a big name last year, and I honestly had a lot of hope for him, but he didn't obviously play much last year. When he did, it wasn't productive. So I think Alvin, at least for another season, this will probably be the last season I want to have Alvin as a stud, but I think he still has one more great year in him.
What's his ADP?
51.
51? Oh, yeah, that's value.
That's
value, bro.
See, and that's what I was going to chime in and say after just seeing what his ADP is. If Alvin has similar production based off what he's had when he's done well, that is really good value for his ADP, in my opinion. Yeah. Now, once again, what we talked about earlier in the podcast, my concern is the overall where the roster is at. And one of the big concerns, which they've addressed through the draft a couple times now, is the offensive line. The offensive line has been the big issue of concern. And Alvin Kamara, as we know, isn't getting any younger. And one of the things about him is he has had a ton of touches, and he's had a big workload early in his career. And you start to wonder with where the team is at roster-wise and the way it's constructed, you just wonder about – I don't deny the amount of touches that he's going to get, but I just wonder where he's going to get them at and how much success he's had, because even in the past – what seems like year, 2 years, it seems like there's been a little bit of a drop off there. I could be wrong. I need to double check, but that's the concern with me going forward is, what's going on around him And as we know too, when you're a player who freaking is in an environment that continues to suck year in and year out, eventually you are a professional athlete and you do start to make business decisions, especially at the running back position. And I'm not saying anything in negativity or discourse to Kamara like he's quitting or anything, but at the same time, there is a little bit different or a way you go about things when it seems like you're in a dead end organization.
He's
and
got a
there's
whole
no-
career ahead of him, so it's probably time to start thinking about, hey, how do I get traded to the Chargers? Time to make that deal.
I
How
was
do I
saying it's
facilitate
like
that
being on
deal?
the Oakland Raiders or the San Diego or Los Angeles Chargers. It's like dead end organizations.
Nah,
Yeah.
bro, he
Nowhere to
just
go.
wants to change the scenery. He needs some sunlight in his life, bro.
I don't know why
He's probably
every
got it in Louisiana.
I don't know why every good veteran at the end of their career thought it was a good idea to go to Oakland. That's what they say.
Yeah.
Where vets go to die.
Yep.
Hey
It's
man,
literally the NFL graveyard. Their logo is just like a dead pirate.
we made it. We made a Super Bowl with Jerry Rice, so that's the only veteran I can really claim. And Rich Gannon won an MVP with us, but
But that's neither here
regardless,
nor there.
yeah, we're not gonna get into Raider hate right now, because that'll be the rest of the podcast if we ever start.
Yeah, it's just low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, well, let me know when the Chargers do something. Anyways,
I'll keep you posted.
Bryce Young to me as my dud. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. He didn't really have a good season last year by any account. Like, I don't think you can look at his season and feel confident moving forward outside of the fact that it can't be much worse. Deontay Johnson gives them a true number one compared to
dude's
Adam Thielen.
garbage.
Hey, as a
He's seen it firsthand.
as a Steeler player, I can imagine, or as a Steeler fan, I can imagine you have your issues with him. I know you've talked at length on that.
He's
But
no
to
George
me,
Pickens.
He's still a good route runner. So he might not have the best hands and he might run backwards when he catches the ball. But I think for the most part, he can still be a number one option, even though it's like a bad number one option. But I still don't believe in Bryce Young enough to think that he's going to just skyrocket in his second year. Not to say that he can't, but I think if you're looking at him as a top 24 quarterback, I think you have rosy colored glasses on, because I could see him being outside of the top 24 and being on waivers all year round. So although a second year quarterback can have high upside, he's not somebody that I would consider drafting in any format outside of Superflex.
J-Bo, I know you're not having that. I know you're not having that. But tell me what you think about your boy Bryce.
No, I think it's fair. I think it's fair to assume that and feel that way. I think what I go back to is what Alex said is it couldn't get worse. It can't get worse. They've obviously made changes there. I think some of the
your boy
issues,
Canales.
I think some of the issues that have gone on in Carolina have been bigger than the actual players. I think it's deeper. I think it's more organizational. As we know, some of the issues with the owner Tepper and even the way the Matt Rule situation, I think Matt Rule got a bad deck of cards with some of what he had to deal with there, as we've come to see later with what's gone on in Carolina and how things have unfolded. Even the Brian Burns situation, just some things there where Carolina missed out on. You look at that trade package and all that stuff they gave up to give to Chicago and other pieces, and how they ended up with Bryce Young. Like, there's a lot at stake and there's a lot of pressure on him to be successful. But once again, there's so much more that goes on outside of it, and the roster, the organization. I mean, I was just looking at the weapons, and you're talking about Chuba Hubbard at running back, Deontay Johnson, Adam Thielen, Xavier Legette, who I do have high hopes on.
Love that guy.
He's the dude.
Yeah, big fan of that guy too. Another thing too, Bryce Young was not set up to be successful last year. A lot of those skill guys were the guys that were there last year. Carolina, if you look at it, had one of the worst offensive lines in the league last year. I mean, it was there. I can honestly say there were times last year where I watched Bryce Young play in an NFL game and I legitimately felt bad for him, or I was concerned because towards the end of the games, it was just open season and he was just getting teed off on. And with the guy who's already had more midget memes than any other starting quarterback in his young NFL career.
I don't know, bro. Kyler gets memed on hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right.
That's the only guy who gets close.
But the difference is Kyler had success early.
Yeah.
So that helped him out. So Bryce,
Yeah, he needs that.
I do see there being more upside this year, kind of more on the fact of what we talked about. It really can't get much worse. There's a couple additions there that I do really like that I think are secretly will be good for Carolina. I think the addition of Xavier Legette, like we talked about, I think he's going to be good for them. They also brought in a tight end, Jatavian Sanders from Texas.
We got
Very
Brooks
Yeah,
too.
Brooks, John
Brooks too, also. So very highly touted guys at one point coming out of college. So they have tried to make some additions there. I believe they also brought in Robert Hunt through an offseason acquisition. Robert Hunt from Miami, who's also a really good interior offensive lineman. He wouldn't be a guy who I would bring in, obviously right now, ADP wise, maybe a low end value at quarterback too, or even, if there's a third guy or you can keep him on a rookie. But that's where I see his trajectory at right now because I think there's a lot that needs to change around Bryce for him to be successful.
Yeah, I agree with
Facts.
that as well.
Well
Big
put.
facts. Big facts.
Yeah, man. He just laid out the whole Panthers organization timeline and everything. I'm like, yeah, dude, that happened for sure. Definitely. Yeah. Where did Brian Burns go? Damn.
Yeah, he's in
He's
New
on
York
Hard
now.
Knocks. Yeah.
Got the bag in New York.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that was actually a really cool series. The off-season Hard Knocks, I like that. It kind of it was like perfect for fantasy football because we're kind of making our own trades in dynasty leagues and stuff right now too. So it's like almost more themed to the type of season that we're in right now as fantasy players.
It was
so
cool to see it.
I would
It's almost like the
argue-
conversations we're having right now. Like they're like, man, do we keep Saquon? I don't know. I feel like I can get Singletary at a good value.
Yeah, bro, I could tell they didn't want Saquon from the get-go. The GM did not want to deal with Saquon whatsoever. Every time Mara kept coming in, he goes,
drama.
"Yeah, I don't know. I don't think we're gonna get him." It's like, bro, you're not even trying. Like,
Sounds like he doesn't want what I want to give him.
Yeah.
hilarious. But all right, guys. Well, any closing thoughts on the NFC South? I know the
Now they're garbage.
Rashad White,
Well, I know
Rashad
about
White
that.
debate got heated. I loved it. Bring some
There's
fire to the show.
There was two right people on this podcast and some wrong people about the Rashad White. And it is what it is at this point. Here we are.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a
time will
reason
tell.
why we're on top and
Time will
you guys
tell.
are on bottom.
I'm on top on my screen. I'm always on top of my screen.
Hey, just so you guys know, in our fantasy league, we do conference style stacking based on success throughout the league, and the two top ones are actually in the top end of the conferences, and the two bottom ones are actually in the bottom end of the conference.
Yeah, a commissioner sometimes does forget to include things like context, and that is a score that's predicated on a dynasty scoring format. Actually, ours is a legacy scoring format, so you'd want to see like a 5-year, 6-year, maybe even 8-year sample size before you make judgments on how good somebody is with their score. But this score being after 1 year, he's got a point. We'll see where things go.
2 years.
Whatever.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, I think that'll cut us out for us today. Thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to @DraftYourLegacy on all social media platforms. Sign up for our email updates on legacyfootball.com and let us know what you guys want to hear next time. Beat your rivals, build your legacy. Thank you guys.
Much love.